There's more than 80 billion neurons in your brain, and they continuously work together, communicating with the help of neurotransmitters or chemical messengers. These important messengers play a key role in the day-to-day bodily functions, and of these messengers, dopamine is the most extensively researched. Dopamine is responsible for several aspects of human behavior and brain function. It allows us to learn, move, sleep, and find pleasure. But too much or too little of the neurotransmitter is associated with some major health issues, from depression and insomnia to schizophrenia and drug abuse. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, or a chemical messenger, and a feel-good hormone. It sends messages between the nerve cells in the brain, and it binds to receptors in the brain, making them send signals from one cell to another. This causes cellular changes, and these can affect your well-being in a number of ways. It plays an important role in many everyday behaviors, including how we feel, move, and eat. It helps us to regulate movement, and it supports reward regulation in the brain. Research also highlights that dopamine receptors are found in the kidneys, the pancreas, the lungs, and the blood vessels outside the central nervous system. To make dopamine, an amino acid called tyrosine changes into a precursor DOPA, a compound that's found in nervous tissue, and then into dopamine. It's produced in 3 parts of the brain: the substantia nigra, the ventral tegmental area, and the hypothalamus. A common question is, what's the difference between serotonin and dopamine? Both are neurotransmitters, but serotonin functions as a mood regulator, while dopamine is connected to the pleasure center. In moments of pleasure and reward, we get a dopamine rush, and when levels are low, we feel a lack of motivation and a feeling of helplessness. The brain's reward system is strongly linked to dopamine. The neurotransmitter functions to promote feelings of enjoyment or reinforcement, and this leads to motivation. Dopamine is considered an essential element in the brain's reward system. Although dopamine neurons account for less than 1% of the total neuron count of the brain, research suggests this neurotransmitter has a profound effect on brain function and mental health. This is called dopamine dysfunction, and it indicates the neurotransmitter isn't interacting with the receptors in the brain properly. When this hormone is produced normally in the body, we don't even notice it. The body and the mind functions as it should. But when levels become too high or too low, that's when our behavior and our physical functions are impacted. This feel-good hormone is involved in reward-related incentive learning, and it modulates behavior choices, especially reward-seeking behavior. Studies also indicate that several mental health disorders involve the pleasure response from the neurotransmitter in the brain, including dopamine. For instance, a chemical change in the brain drives addictive behaviors, causing mental health issues like eating disorders, self-injury, compulsive sex behaviors, internet gaming addiction, and gambling. There's also a clear relationship between depression and a dopamine deficiency. According to animal and human studies, dopamine levels that are too low can cause fatigue, trouble focusing, mood changes, insomnia and sleep disturbances, anxiety, lack of motivation, and feelings of guilt and hopelessness. Abnormal dopamine levels, either too high or too low, are also linked to many pathological disorders, including schizophrenia, Tourette's syndrome, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, autism, ADHD, and drug abuse. Because dopamine receptors directly regulate the neurotransmission of other neurotransmitters, research shows a dysfunction can lead to issues with motor activity and neurological function. Eating tyrosine food is especially important for people with a dopamine deficiency. Tyrosine is an amino acid, and it serves as a precursor for dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Studies conclude that tyrosine influences the dopamine levels, so consuming more of the amino acid can help to reverse a deficiency. Some of the best tyrosine foods for raising dopamine to incorporate into your diet are grass-fed meat, pasture-raised poultry and wild-caught fish, eggs, organic dairy, nuts and seeds, beans and legumes. In order to boost the dopamine levels by eating tyrosine, you need to consume a well-balanced diet that's rich in micronutrients. Tyrosine needs adequate amounts of vitamin B6, folate and copper in order to be converted into neurotransmitters. L-tyrosine is also available as a supplement, and this might be helpful if you can't get enough of the amino acid in your diet. It's also important to avoid dopamine-depleting foods, like excessive amounts of saturated fat and refined sugar. This can cause short-term spike in the hormone, but it can lead to a deficiency over time. Getting enough sleep helps the brain to regulate the production of this hormone. Our circadian timing system is the body's internal clock or biological pacemaker. In the morning, dopamine levels rise naturally, allowing us to wake and to start the day. In the evening, the levels fall so we can turn off our brain and settle in for the night. Sticking to a consistent bedtime every night and a wake time every morning promotes the proper production of this neurotransmitter. Studies find when dopamine receptors decrease in the brain due to sleep deprivation, this is associated with reduced alertness and increased sleepiness. There's 3 major neurotransmitters that are modulated by exercise: noradrenaline, serotonin, and dopamine. It's the connection between physical activity and these neurotransmitters that allows exercise to positively affect the brain. Animal studies have shown that treadmill exercise counteracts motor dysfunction by increasing dopamine production. In addition to this, wheel running has been shown to have a protective effect against neurotoxicity and on dopaminergic neurons. Studies have found that when we practice mindfulness meditation and yoga, it helps to increase dopamine levels and reduce feelings of anxiety. Incorporating a yoga practice or any type of meditation, be it seated, walking, or laying, can help to regulate the production of this neurotransmitter. Dopamine levels also increase when we're rewarded or after pleasurable experiences, so it makes sense that practicing simple acts of kindness can also help to boost levels of dopamine. There isn't exactly a dopamine supplement, but there's lots of supplements that can help to boost the levels naturally. A 2016 study shows how vitamin D treatment modulates the dopamine circuits in the brain. Using a vitamin D supplement for this reason has been shown to support treatments for drug addiction and dopamine-dependent behaviors. Researchers have learned that bacteria can synthesize and respond to hormones and neurotransmitters. This means adding more good bacteria to your gut and reducing bad bacteria can have a positive effect on your dopamine levels. A study published in Psychopharmacology found that curcumin was able to increase serotonin and dopamine levels in mice. Mucuna pruens is a tropical plant, and it contains high levels of L-DOPA, and this is a precursor to dopamine. For this reason, Mucuna pruens supplements are used in Ayurvedic medicine for improving Parkinson's disease. It's recommended, however, to cycle the Mucuna pruens as to not gain a tolerance to it. In addition to these natural ways to boost dopamine, there's also a pharmaceutical drug called levodopa, and this is used to increase the levels and to treat Parkinson's disease. There's also dopamine agonists, and these make up a class of drug that bind and activate the dopamine receptor in the brain. These drugs make the body think that it's getting enough of the hormone, and they're used to treat a range of health conditions, including depression, insomnia, and fibromyalgia. Studies indicate dopamine plays a role in many brain, behavioral, and bodily functions, including memory, learning, attention, behavior and cognition, voluntary movement, and pain processing. Motivation, sense of reward and punishment, heart rate, blood pressure, sleep and dreaming, mood, lactation, and electrolyte balance. We absolutely need this neurotransmitter to function properly, and there's many ways to boost the levels naturally. But levels are also increased with some not so healthy actions or substances like drinking alcohol, eating sugary foods, using drugs like nicotine and cocaine, and engaging in other rewarding behaviors. These acts of self-medicating can cause health issues down the line, and sometimes they can be destructive or addictive behaviors. When it comes to using pharmaceutical medications to boost dopamine or to mimic it in the brain, there's some possible side effects, including nausea, dizziness, hallucinations, impulse control disorders, and low blood pressure. While increasing these hormones is important for some health conditions, reducing the production of the neurotransmitter is sometimes necessary. Dopamine antagonists are a class of drugs that reduce dopamine activity in the brain, and these drugs are used to treat people who produce too much of the hormone and to deal with health issues like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Dopamine is commonly called the happy hormone because it increases in moments of pleasure and reward. It's a chemical messenger and it interacts with neurons throughout the brain. Levels too high or too low can have major impacts on our health, impacting the way we feel, learn, and behave. For people dealing with a dysfunction, eating foods high in tyrosine, engaging in regular exercise, getting enough sleep, and practicing meditation and kindness can all have a positive effect. There's supplements that can help to increase the happy hormone, including probiotics, vitamin D, curcumin, and mucuna pruins. You can also check out my video on Know Your Neurotransmitter, dopamine, and my other videos on how to increase dopamine for more information about this. For more on herbs, supplements, and natural treatment plans, check out my website.